Mark chapter 5. Welcome back to our study of the book of Mark this summer, and I hope you guys are following along as we study through the book of Mark. Again, we're 5 weeks in, but it's still not too late to get caught up. Mark is an easy, fast-paced read. I encourage you guys to get caught up with us and join us here for Mark 5. So as we dive into the content today, I want to get this idea across to you guys. That main idea is that Jesus' power, authority, and goodness are on full display through these acts of healing. We're going to explore 3 different healings, or 3 different kind of micro stories in this chapter today, where Jesus' power, authority, and goodness are on display. And he does that by healing people in 3 very unique ways. So let's dive in. Let's read the first part here, Mark 5, 1 through 20. It says, "They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately," there's that word again, there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, 'What have you done with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me.' For he was saying to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.' And Jesus asked him, 'What is your name?' He replied, 'My name is Legion, for we are many.' And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, 'Send us to the pigs, let us enter them.' So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with them. And he did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you.' And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled." So this is an action-packed story. You notice the word "immediately" is used there again several times. And you can really see how Jesus demonstrates his authority as God in this story. The demons tremble before him in this story. You see they beg him, and they're trembling in fear before him and saying, "Don't send us away, send us into the pigs." You can see the remarkable transformation that takes place in the demon-possessed man's life. It's really unbelievable until you read it here in the Word of God. This guy had the reputation for being crazy, unhinged. He was possessed by all these demons. And for the people to see him in his right mind there, it demonstrates the power and the authority that Jesus had over these demons. And it also demonstrates the power and authority that Jesus has to change lives completely. Let's look at verse 19. This is a really interesting verse. "He did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you.'" This man begged Jesus, "Please, let me follow you." And Jesus grants his request, but not to follow him physically, but to follow him spiritually. And he says, "Go back into your hometown and tell others about what I've done for you. Tell them about my mercy." And so he goes and does this, and you have to imagine that the effect of this story would have been profound upon the people that he shared it with. And so we have to assume that many people came to knowledge of Christ because of this story. All right, well, let's move on. There's a lot more to get to in this chapter. Let's read verses 21 through 43. "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, 'My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live.' And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler in the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside, and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately, there's that word again, overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So many of you might know that I'm a dad. And when you read this story as a parent, it totally hits differently. And I can't even imagine the panic, the fear, the anxiety that this father felt for his child in this moment. But we're going to see Jesus' goodness and power on display here yet again. On the way to Jairus' house, he's stopped by this woman who has the blood disease. And this is an interesting account here, because this woman believes if she can just touch the hem of his garment, then she'll be healed, which we might view as kind of superstitious, and maybe it is a little bit. But the important part of this is that the woman had faith that if she could just get near Jesus, then Jesus would heal her. And the key there is having faith. It's interesting also that Jesus said, "Who touched me?" As if he didn't already know who touched him, because he's God and he knows everything. But he didn't ask that question to find information. He asked that question so that the woman who touched him would have an encounter with him. But Jesus isn't done yet. He finally rolls up to Jairus' house, but instead of being met with praise and adoration and welcome, he's actually mocked for what he says to these people. He says, "This girl is sleeping. Why are you mourning?" And instead of realizing, "Oh, Jesus, you know so much," they mock him. So Jesus decides, you know what, I'm going to get these haters out of here. They don't need to see this. They don't need to see my power and goodness on display here, because they've already made up their minds. So Jesus empties the house. It's just Jairus, his wife, and Jairus' daughter lying on the bed. And Jesus wants Jairus and his wife to see his power and his goodness are personal. They're not just big things to be put on display, this spectacle, this huge deal. They're personal, and they can impact everyone. And that's what Jesus' power and goodness are for us too. They're personal. They're not just something that we read about in the Bible. The same power that raised Jairus' daughter from the dead is the same power that we have access to through the Holy Spirit, through salvation. Jesus wants us to understand through this story that his power is for everyone. His saving power is for everyone. Not just the power to physically raise people from the dead, but the power to do that spiritually as well. Jesus wants to encounter you with his goodness, his power, and his authority, so that you can see that they're not just stories we read in the Bible, but they're for you as well. And he wants to show you that there's nothing too powerful going on in your life. There's nothing too difficult going on in your life that he can't overcome. Well, I hope this study has been super helpful for you guys today, and I hope that it's blessed you. Come back next week for Mark chapter 6. Pastor Austin will be back from kids camp, and we'll get moving into the next part of this book as we keep moving forward in our Mark summer series. We'll see you guys later.